Graham Hill was one of the real characters of motor racing history. A brilliant driver on the track and the life and soul of parties after the races. But he lived in dangerous times. He'd seen many of his friends killed driving racing cars. When he retired, having been champion in 1962 and 1968, winner of the Le Mans 24-hour race, winner at Indianapolis, there was a great feeling of relief that Graham would be around for many years to come to entertain us with those stories. Sadly, it wasn't to be. He was killed in a light aircraft crash in 1975. His whole family had lived motor racing, and his son Damon was just 15 at the time of his father's death. But now he follows in those famous footsteps as he starts his first year as a full-time Grand Prix driver with the Cannon Williams team. Frank Williams announced Damon's dream drive last December, but how did Damon get started? Well, we caught up with him at Donington for the third Grand Prix of the season, the Grand Prix of Europe.
I started because of being around racing cars, and I can always remember being in the paddock at Grand Prix and sitting in cars from a very early age. I sat in probably all the BRMs that there were and Lotuses in the 60s. And it's just being in the environment, more or less, so that's the biggest influence.
You might have thought that with a name like Hill, motor racing stardom would come easily. But in fact, Damon rebelled against the car scene and started in motorcycle racing. He did well and clocked over 40 wins, being champion of brands riding a Yamaha. But almost inevitably, he couldn't resist the temptation of cars. He completed a full season in Formula Ford in 1985 and quickly moved up to Formula 3 in 86. In 89, he ran in Formula 3000 and again in 1990, when he also started testing for Williams, clocking up over 18,000 track miles. But what, at the mature age of 30, was the attraction of just testing?
In order to get a Grand Prix drive at the bottom level, you almost certainly have to bring money. And it was difficult to get money, so the testing opportunity with Williams meant that I'd get mileage, which then might help me get into a race car because of my experience.
And that experience paid dividends when they came to choose this year's drivers.
Myself, in common with a number of the engineers here who had worked with him, were very impressed with his ability in the car, the way he handled himself, the way he stayed calm when problems came up and thought them through. We were very supportive of him getting the second seat. It was quite it was a considered gamble, but it was a bit of a gamble because he didn't have a great historical racing record behind him, and racing is really quite a lot more pressure than testing.
Now, Nigel Mansell's been quoted as saying that anybody could have won in the Williams. At the beginning of the year, did you feel that whoever you picked to drive was going to win the World Championship?
There's a lot to racecraft other than just being quick. And there are many hundreds of potential mistakes to make, and the drivers who win championships are the ones that, in general, don't make those errors. And I don't think it's true to say that anybody could win the championship in a Williams in '93.
By now, Damon had already had his first taste of Grand Prix racing as a backmarker in a Brabham, being lapped by Mansell's Williams.
I had nothing to lose. You know, the team were struggling for cash, the car was uncompetitive, but I thought, well, if I can get in the car and even qualify it, then I'll have done a good job. It's definitely harder to get into a race with a car that you're bordering on not qualifying with than it is to qualify high up the grid with a car you know is competitive. I mean, you're hanging it out in a car that you're not terribly happy with just to get on the back row of the grid, and you have to ask yourself sometimes, you think to yourself, well, why am I bothering to do this?
Now Damon's task was to match the pace of his teammate Alain Prost. What did he think of the new boy?
It's always, you know, pretty good spirit. always want to help the team, and doesn't want to get everything for him, and he is a gentleman. About the talent, I think he's very fast, and but he has also a lot of pressure, not only because his name is Hill, but he's also part of the best team at the moment in Formula 1.
Hill had a pretty disastrous start to the season, losing control right in front of Prost at the very first corner in South Africa. Then, running midfield, he was attacked and pushed into retirement by Zanardi's Lotus. Not the dream debut he'd hoped for. When the heavens opened in Brazil, Prost found himself in the sand trap and Damon found himself in the lead behind the safety car. The first time this had been seen in Grand Prix racing. When the race was restarted, Hill led the pack in impressive style, but it wasn't long before the experienced Senna sliced past and went on to victory. 2 weeks later, the team prepared Damon's car at Donington for the European Grand Prix, the first time that Damon had had the chance to show his skills in a competitive car in front of a home crowd. And show them he did. He drove brilliantly, eventually coming second. It was a tricky race with changing conditions and countless stops for tyres. And Damon showed he wasn't afraid to overtake Prost. At Monaco, there was real proof that he'd matured as a Grand Prix driver. When a charging Gerhard Berger punted him round at the hairpin, he calmly extricated himself and drove on to finish second.
I've not seen many drivers who I think would have handled the situation as well as Damon. I think that's pretty typical of his thinking brain, and I would say all the world champions that I've seen have had that type of ability.
Formula One is big business. A team like Williams costs in the region of £22 million a year to run. The pressures are phenomenal, so how was Damon coping?
I think the additional work that's involved, that's not being in the car, the additional work, setting up, thinking about setup of the car and working for the sponsors, that's harder than I'm used to. And generally being asked questions by all sorts of people all over the place about things, whether you want to get involved in doing this, that and that, you know, business proposals and stuff. That's stuff that I've not been used to, and that's quite hard always having to think of an answer for something.
In the modern, high-tech, high-downforce world of Grand Prix racing, you can lose up to 1.5 litres of body fluid in a race, and the G-forces mean the drivers must be in peak condition. So he takes keeping fit seriously.
I was in the gym Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday I wasn't.
It's tough work.
It's physical driving these cars. Silverstone is very physical, and inevitably it's best to put in a little bit of training on top of what you might normally do for Silverstone because of the extra loadings.
The body could cope, but the engine couldn't, and failure robbed him of his possible first Grand Prix win. But then came victory at Hungary, followed by 2 more triumphs at Belgium and Monza, which has firmly established Damon Hill as a Grand Prix star. But with the championship all sewn up by Prost and Damon just 2 points ahead of Senna, is now the time for Alain to help him.
Well, I think he should do, don't you? I think he owes it to me. I think he should back me up.
As the team left for its Far East tour, we asked Patrick Head if that meant that there had been team orders earlier this year.
There were 2 races this year where there were team instructions, and I think Damon scowled to himself fairly heavily. He didn't like it at all, and I don't think it'll be a situation that will arise next year unless the championship is only attainable by one of our drivers. Then the other driver, whichever he is, will be asked to support the one who is in a position to win the championship.
Next year, Damon partners Ayrton Senna. With all the new boy pressures a thing of the past, does he relish the task?
I think that I'm inevitably going to have a mountain to climb against someone like Senna. He is, not only is he incredibly quick, but he's vastly more experienced than I am in Formula One. So I expect that next year will be a lot tougher, and just have to go quicker, really.